Sign this, or we destroy everything you've built. Are you sure?
My future son-in-law's father slid a folder across the table and said, "Sign this, or we destroy everything you've built." He thought I was just an old man in a worn flannel. What he didn't know? The company his son had been running for 14 months, the salary, the power, the office, every single thing was mine. And he had just declared war at my table. I've learned something most people never do. If you look ordinary enough, the world stops paying attention. My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 49 years old, 6 feet tall, lean in a way that comes more from routine than effort. My hair has gone mostly gray at the temples, and I keep it short. Nothing styled, nothing that draws the eye. My face isn't memorable. That's intentional. I dress in faded jeans, worn boots, and a rotation of plain button-down shirts that look like they came from a clearance rack. Most days, I drive a 10-year-old pickup with a dent on the rear bumper I never bothered to fix. And yet, for the past 23 years, I've been the sole owner of Carter Dynamics, a technology and logistics company that quietly powers supply chains across half the country. Nobody in my neighborhood knows that. To them, I'm just Ethan, the guy who fixes old laptops for free on Saturdays. "Mr. Carter, it won't turn on again," Mrs. Alvarez said that morning, standing on my porch with her ancient Dell tucked under her arm. Mrs. Alvarez is in her late 60s, short, with silver hair always tied into a loose bun. She has the kindest eyes you'll ever see, but technology terrifies her. Her husband passed years ago, and ever since, I've been her unofficial tech support. "Let me guess," I said, taking the laptop from her. "You closed it while it was updating again." She gave me a guilty smile. "It takes so long." "It's supposed to," I said gently. I motioned her inside. My house is small, 2 bedrooms, warm lighting, nothing flashy. The kind of place people walk into and immediately understand. This man lives simply. What they don't see is that simplicity is a choice. While the laptop booted up, I glanced at the clock. Emily was supposed to be here any minute. Emily Carter, my daughter, is 26. She's everything I'm not: expressive, warm, impossible to ignore. She has long chestnut hair that falls in soft waves down her back, sharp green eyes, and a smile that fills a room before she even speaks. She runs a small but growing nonprofit that funds education programs for underprivileged kids. Unlike me, she doesn't hide. She builds things in the open. I build things quietly. The front door opened without a knock. "Dad?" she called. "In the kitchen," I replied. She walked in, sunlight following her like it had a preference. But she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a man I hadn't seen before. "Dad, this is Ryan," she said. Ryan Brooks stepped forward and offered his hand. He looked about 30, tall, maybe 6'2", athletic build but not bulky. His dark hair was neatly styled, and his jawline had that clean, deliberate sharpness that suggested discipline. He wore a fitted navy shirt, sleeves rolled just enough to show he knew exactly how he looked without appearing like he tried. His grip was firm, confident, not aggressive. "I've heard a lot about you, sir," he said. His voice was steady, practiced, but not rehearsed. "There's a difference." I shook his hand and held his gaze a second longer than most people would. "I hope only the good parts," I replied. He smiled, just slightly. "I'm working on earning those," he said. That answer told me more than anything else could have. Most men in his position try to impress. Ryan didn't. He positioned himself. Interesting. Emily rolled her eyes. "Ignore him. He's been rehearsing that line in the car." "I have not," Ryan said, though the corner of his mouth betrayed him. I watched them, really watched. The way Emily stood just a little closer to him than necessary. The way Ryan angled his body toward her without thinking. The kind of unconscious alignment that doesn't come from performance. It comes from something real. But real doesn't mean safe. "Sit," I said, nodding toward the table. As they settled in, I leaned back slightly, studying Ryan without making it obvious. Because here's the thing about men like me. I don't just meet people. I evaluate them. And something about Ryan Brooks told me this wasn't going to be simple. Not for him. Not for me. and definitely not for whatever came next. The moment Ryan left my house that afternoon, I didn't sit down. I made a call. That's how I've always operated. While most people rely on instinct, I verify it. Within an hour, a file began forming on Ryan Brooks, 30 years old, raised in Tulsa, Oklahoma. His father owned a mid-sized construction firm. Volatile reputation, aggressive deals, inconsistent ethics depending on who you asked. His mother, quiet, socially polished, the type who knew exactly when to smile and when to stay silent. Ryan, however, didn't follow the same path. He left home at 18, paid his own way through college, worked 2 jobs, graduated near the top of his class. That detail mattered, not because it impressed me, but because it explained him. People who build themselves tend to move differently. That night I sat at my kitchen table, the same place I'd repaired Mrs. Alvarez's laptop hours earlier, and stared at the preliminary report. No red flags. That bothered me more than if there had been one. Nobody is that clean. Nobody. The next step wasn't about digging deeper. It was about placing him under pressure. Controlled pressure. The kind that reveals who a man really is when he thinks nobody important is watching. So I made another call, this one to Daniel Reeves. Daniel is 52, tall, broad-shouldered, always in tailored suits that cost more than my truck. He's been my CFO for 15 years. Sharp mind, no patience, loyal in the way only men who've seen you build something from nothing can be. I want you to initiate a search, I told him. COO position, quietly. There was a pause. You already have someone in mind, Daniel said. I always do. I gave him Ryan's name, no explanation. Daniel didn't ask for one. That's why he still works for me. Within weeks, Ryan was contacted by an executive search firm, one of the best, one that didn't take instructions from anyone except people like me. He went through every stage like any other candidate. Interviews, evaluations, stress tests. I watched everything. Not from a boardroom, but from a secondary screen, in a private room, off-site. Anonymous, invisible. The first time I saw him in that environment, something shifted. He wasn't trying to impress. He was solving problems. There's a difference. In one scenario, they presented him with a failing logistics model. Numbers bleeding slowly, inefficient routing. Most candidates tried to explain it. Ryan fixed it. In under 10 minutes. No theatrics. No over-explaining. Just clarity. That's when I leaned back in my chair and said quietly, "Interesting." Meanwhile, Emily found out 2 days after the process started. She showed up at my house late evening, still in her work clothes, cream blouse, dark jeans, hair tied back in a loose ponytail, her face sharper when she's worried. "You're testing him, aren't you?" she said, arms crossed. I didn't deny it. "I'm understanding him," I corrected. She sighed, pacing the room. "Dad, he's not like that. He's not playing a game." "Everyone's playing a game," I said. "Some people just don't know it yet." She stopped, looked at me. Really looked this time. "And what happens if he fails your test?" she asked. I held her gaze. "Then you deserve to know that before it costs you more than just time." That answer didn't comfort her. It wasn't supposed to. Over the next month, Ryan advanced through every stage. Not perfectly, but consistently. That mattered more. Perfect people hide things. Consistent people reveal them. The final recommendation came from Daniel himself. "He's the best candidate we've seen in years," he said. "If you're asking my professional opinion, he's the right choice." I hung up and sat in silence for a moment. Then I made the decision. Ryan Brooks would become the COO of Carter Dynamics. And he would never know that the man in the worn flannel shirt, the one he shook hands with in a quiet kitchen, was the reason he got there. Ryan's first day as COO didn't come with a grand entrance. He walked into Carter Dynamics like a man who understood that titles don't command respect. Results do. From the moment he stepped into the headquarters, a 40-story glass structure in downtown Austin, he carried himself with controlled confidence, not arrogance. At 30, Ryan Brooks had the posture of someone who had learned early that nothing would be handed to him. He moved quickly, spoke clearly, and listened more than he talked, something most executives twice his age still hadn't figured out. I watched it all from a private feed seated miles away in a quiet office nobody could trace back to me. No name on the door, no connection on paper. Just a screen, and the man I had placed into a position that could either elevate him or expose him. The first real test came faster than expected. A logistics division in the Midwest had been bleeding money for 6 consecutive quarters. The previous leadership had buried the issue under layers of optimistic projections and delayed reporting. It was the kind of problem that doesn't explode, it rots slowly. I didn't intervene, I waited. Within 72 hours, Ryan requested full access to the division's internal data. No committee, no delay, just a direct move. That caught my attention. Most people hesitate when stepping into inherited problems. Ryan didn't. He dissected it, line by line, contract by contract, until the pattern became obvious. Redundant routing, inflated vendor costs, a silent leak hidden behind acceptable losses. He didn't call a meeting to talk about it. He rebuilt the structure, quietly, efficiently. Within 2 weeks, he presented a revised model that cut operational waste by nearly 30%. Daniel Reeves called me that night. He didn't just fix it, Daniel said, voice steady but impressed. He understood it better than the people who built it. I didn't respond immediately. I didn't need to. I had already seen it. But numbers aren't what build loyalty. People are. And that's where most executives fail. Not Ryan. 3 weeks into the role, he did something unexpected. Instead of staying confined to executive floors, he spent time on site at one of the distribution centers, a place most leadership avoided because it wasn't polished. There, he met Marcus Hill. Marcus is in his early 40s, broad-shouldered, with a permanent crease between his brows from years of managing high-pressure operations. He's the kind of man who doesn't trust titles, only effort. Marcus had been with the company for over a decade, overlooked for promotion more times than he deserved. When Ryan walked onto that floor, Marcus didn't greet him like a superior. He greeted him like a problem waiting to happen. And Ryan didn't push back. He listened, for hours, asked questions, took notes himself instead of handing it off. By the end of that visit, Marcus wasn't smiling, but he wasn't dismissive either. That was progress. The shift didn't happen overnight. Respect never does. But it started showing in small ways. Fewer complaints, faster execution. Managers who had spent years resisting change began implementing Ryan's systems without needing to be pushed. It wasn't because they were told to. It was because the systems worked. I watched the internal metrics climb, efficiency up, losses down, morale stabilizing. But what mattered more wasn't on any report. It was in the tone of conversations. The way people said his name, not with obligation, but with acknowledgement. That's when I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself a rare thought. I might have been wrong about how difficult this would be. Emily noticed it too. She mentioned it casually one evening when she stopped by, her tone lighter than it had been weeks ago. People at his company actually like him, she said, almost surprised. I didn't tell her I already knew. I didn't tell her I'd been watching every step. I simply nodded. Because trust, for me, isn't given in moments. It's built in patterns. And Ryan Brooks was starting to form one I couldn't ignore. Not perfect, not flawless, but real. And in my world, real is the only thing that lasts. Ryan didn't call me often, not directly. Our interactions had stayed comfortably within the boundaries of family dinners, short conversations, and the occasional polite check-in. That's why when my phone rang on a Thursday evening and his name appeared on the screen, I noticed it immediately. "Ethan," he said, his tone warm but slightly tighter than usual. "I was hoping you'd be free this weekend. My parents are in town. They'd really like to meet you properly." There was nothing overtly wrong with the request. In fact, it was expected at this stage. But something in the pause before he said properly didn't sit right. Not alarm bells, just a quiet shift. The kind you learn not to ignore after a lifetime of building things that people eventually try to take. "Where?" I asked. "A place called Alder and Stone," he replied. I knew it. High-end, private dining rooms, the kind of restaurant where conversations are rarely just about food. "Saturday night," he added. 7. I agreed. Emily showed up less than an hour later, unannounced, which wasn't unusual for her, but the energy was different. She stood in my doorway for a moment before stepping inside, arms folded, her posture tighter than usual. She was wearing a soft gray sweater and black jeans, her hair loose, but she kept pushing it behind her ear, a small habit she only had when something was bothering her. "He told you, didn't he?" she asked. I nodded. "Dinner." She exhaled slowly. "I don't know why, but something about this feels off." That caught my attention. Emily wasn't prone to vague instincts. She was emotional, yes, but grounded. When she felt something, there was usually a reason, even if she couldn't articulate it yet. "What do you know about his parents?" I asked. She hesitated. "Not much. Ryan doesn't talk about them a lot. His dad's in construction, his mom, social, I guess. Polished." That word again. Polished. I filed it away. "You're not going to say no, are you?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, I'm going." She looked at me, searching for something. Reassurance, maybe. "Just be careful, okay?" I gave her a small smile. I always am. The next morning, I started making calls. Quiet ones. The kind that don't leave trails. Within a day, I had names. Thomas Brooks and Linda Brooks. Thomas, mid-60s, tall, broad, a man who had built his construction business aggressively. Fast expansions, high-risk contracts, a reputation for winning deals that didn't always look clean from the outside. Linda Brooks, early 60s, elegant, composed, known in certain circles for her ability to navigate social environments with precision. Together, they had built a life that looked successful from the outside, but like most things, the details mattered more than the surface. There were disputes, old ones, settled but not forgotten. Enough to form a pattern. I sat with that information longer than I needed to, not because I was unsure, but because I was aligning it with something I couldn't yet see clearly. Saturday came faster than expected. I chose my usual clothes. Clean flannel, dark jeans, boots, nothing that would change their first impression of me, because first impressions are data, and I wanted theirs unfiltered. As I drove toward the restaurant, the city lights reflecting across the windshield, I felt that same quiet shift again. Not fear, not even concern, just awareness. The kind that tells you this isn't just a dinner, this is positioning. And someone at that table believes they have the advantage. I parked, stepped out, and took a moment before walking in. Not to prepare, I was already prepared, but to settle into the version of myself they were expecting to meet. The man who fixes laptops, the man who grows tomatoes, the man nobody notices. Because sometimes the most powerful position you can hold is the one no one thinks to question. The hostess led me through a corridor lined with soft amber lights and into a private dining room where the air felt curated, quiet, controlled, intentional. Ryan stood as I entered, offering a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He looked sharper than usual tonight. Dark suit, tailored perfectly, posture straight, but there was tension in the way his shoulders held. Not fear, pressure. Across the table sat his parents. Thomas Brooks rose first. He was in his mid-60s, tall, broad, with a heavy presence that came not from height alone, but from the way he occupied space. His hair was steel gray, combed back with precision, his eyes sharp and assessing, the kind of eyes that measure before they greet. His handshake was firm, held half a second too long. Control. Linda Brooks followed, early 60s, elegant, slender, with carefully styled blonde hair and a composed smile that arrived before any real emotion. She wore a dark green dress, minimal jewelry, everything understated but deliberate. She touched my arm lightly as she greeted me, a gesture practiced enough to feel almost rehearsed. "Ethan," she said, voice smooth. "We've heard so much about you." I smiled. "I imagine you have." We sat. The conversation began exactly as expected, light, polite, circling nothing of importance. Ryan spoke about work carefully, keeping details broad. I noticed that. He always did that with me. Professional courtesy, he believed, or maybe instinct. Either way, he was protecting something, even if he didn't know what. Thomas asked about my home, my little projects. The tone neutral, but the interest selective. He wasn't listening for answers. He was mapping reactions. I let him. I answered simply, tomatoes, old computers, quiet routines. The version of me they had already decided I was. 40 minutes in, just as the rhythm settled into something almost convincing, Thomas reached into his jacket. The movement was slow, deliberate. He placed a cream-colored folder on the table between us. Not slid, placed. That distinction matters. Objects that are slid are suggestions. Objects that are placed are statements. Linda's fingers tightened slightly around her wine glass. Ryan looked down, not at the folder, but at the table. That told me everything I needed to know. "Ethan," Thomas said, his voice lowering just enough to shift the room. "There's something we've been meaning to discuss." I didn't touch the folder. "Then you should probably discuss it," I replied. He opened it himself, turning it so the documents faced me. Photocopies, contracts, old signatures, names I hadn't seen in years. And there it was, Michael Brooks, his brother. The connection clicked into place with a quiet certainty that felt less like surprise and more like confirmation. Thomas watched my face carefully, waiting, measuring. "Michael was my brother," he said. "You destroyed him." I let the silence sit for a moment, not because I needed time, but because he did. "He built a company with you," Thomas continued, his tone sharpening slightly. "And you forced him out, took everything, left him with nothing." Linda leaned in just enough to support the narrative, her expression softening in all the right places. "He never recovered," she added. "Our family paid for that." And there it was, not just accusation, framing. "What is it you want?" I asked, keeping my voice even. Thomas didn't hesitate. "You step away from Carter Dynamics, quietly, no noise, no investigation, and you compensate this family for what was taken." He tapped the folder lightly. "The numbers are in there." Across the table, Ryan shifted, subtle, but enough. His jaw tightened, his eyes flicking briefly toward his father, then back down. Not agreement, conflict. "I didn't know it would go like this," he said suddenly, voice low. Thomas didn't look at him. "Stay out of this." That was the moment everything changed. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a shift in alignment. I looked at Ryan. Really looked this time. And what I saw wasn't a man in control of the situation. It was a man realizing he never was. The room felt smaller after that. Tighter. The kind of tension that doesn't need raised voices to exist. It sits. It waits. It sharpens. I reached forward, not for the documents, but for my glass of water. Because the trap had been set. They just didn't realize it wasn't around me. I didn't open Thomas's folder, not because I didn't recognize the names, I did, but because I didn't need his version to understand the truth. Instead, I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and placed my own envelope on the table. Smaller, plain. The kind of envelope people overlook until it's too late. Thomas's eyes dropped to it immediately. "Good." "Michael Brooks kept records," I said, my voice calm, steady. "Selective ones." I slid the envelope forward but didn't open it yet. Control isn't about volume, it's about timing. Thomas leaned back slightly, his confidence still intact, but thinner now. "You're going to tell me my own brother was the problem?" he asked. There was steel in his voice. Years of belief, years of certainty. Linda shifted beside him, her fingers tightening around the stem of her glass, her expression softening in a way that felt less genuine now, more strategic. "Ethan," she said gently, "this doesn't have to be adversarial. We're just trying to resolve something that hurt our family." There it was again, framing. I looked at her, then back at Thomas. "Then let's resolve it properly." I opened my envelope. Inside were original documents, not copies. Bank records from 30 years ago, transaction logs, signatures verified by institutions that no longer existed in their original form. I placed the first page on the table, turning it toward Thomas. "Joint account withdrawals," I said. "Consistent patterns over 18 months. Funds moved into a secondary entity registered under Michael's wife's maiden name." I placed another sheet beside it. "Client transfer records. Contracts moved before termination of partnership agreements." Then a third. "Correspondence. His words, not mine. The room didn't get louder, it got quieter. Thomas leaned forward, scanning the pages. His jaw tightened, not in anger but in resistance. Linda didn't reach for the documents this time. She watched his reaction instead. That told me everything about her role in this. Support, not strategy. Useful, but not decisive. "These can be fabricated," Thomas said finally, but the conviction wasn't the same. It never is once doubt enters the room. "They can be verified," I replied. Across the table, Ryan hadn't moved much, but the stillness was different now. His eyes weren't on me. They were on the documents, processing, recalculating. He looked up at his father, and for the first time since I'd met him, there was something unfiltered in his expression. Not confidence, not control. Something closer to fracture. "You told me he was forced out," Ryan said quietly. Thomas didn't answer immediately. That was the answer. Linda stepped in, her voice softer, quicker. "Ryan, your uncle suffered, that's what matters. The details." "The details are the story," Ryan cut in. His voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. That caught me off guard, not the resistance, but the precision of it. I let the moment settle. Then I spoke again. "There's one more thing," I said. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me. Ryan's attention snapped fully into place now, focused, direct. The way I'd seen him in boardrooms. The way he handled problems when he believed they were real. "The position you've held for the last 14 months, I continued. "The authority, the decisions, the structure you've been operating inside." I paused, not for effect, but to ensure clarity. "That company is mine." Silence. Not confusion, not immediate reaction. Just a complete absence of sound, like the room itself needed a second to process what had just been said. Ryan blinked once, slowly. His expression didn't collapse, it reorganized. That's the difference between men who break and men who adapt. Thomas leaned back, the weight of the situation finally catching up to him. Not defeat yet, but displacement. The ground he thought he stood on wasn't there anymore. "You're saying," Ryan started, his voice lower now, stripped of performance, "this entire time—" "I hired you," I said. "I placed you, and I've been watching every decision you've made." Linda exhaled sharply, the first genuine reaction she'd shown all evening. "So this was a setup?" she asked. "No," I replied, meeting her gaze. "This was a test." Ryan didn't look at her. He didn't look at his father. He looked at me. And for the first time since this dinner began, the tension in the room wasn't about the past. It was about what came next. No one spoke for a long moment after I said it. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but heavy, layered with everything people are suddenly forced to reconsider. Ryan was the first to move, not dramatically, just a shift in posture, a slow inhale, his shoulders pulling back as if he was physically making room for the weight of what he'd just learned. At 30, Ryan Brooks had built himself from nothing, but this was different. This wasn't a problem to solve. This was a line to choose. He turned to his father first. Thomas sat rigid, his earlier authority stripped down to something quieter, more fragile. His hands rested on the table, fingers slightly curled, like he was holding on to something that wasn't there anymore. "How long?" Ryan asked. His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it. "How long did you know who he was?" Thomas didn't answer immediately. That hesitation was louder than anything he could have said. "Before you got serious with Emily," Ryan continued, connecting the pieces himself. "You knew, and you still let this happen." Linda leaned forward quickly, her voice soft but urgent, the tone of someone trying to regain control of a narrative slipping away. "Ryan, your father was trying to protect this family. Your uncle—" "Stop," Ryan said, not loud, but final. He didn't look at her. He didn't need to. His focus stayed on Thomas. "You used me," he said. The words weren't emotional, they were precise. "You positioned me to get close to him, to her." That landed differently. Because this time it wasn't about business, it was about Emily. As if called by the weight of her name, the door behind me opened. Emily stepped in. She must have arrived minutes earlier, unnoticed in the tension of the room. She stood there for a second, taking everything in. She looked different tonight, not in appearance, but in presence. Her posture was straight, her expression composed, but her eyes were sharp, searching. Emily Carter has always been warm, empathetic, but there's a line in her you don't cross. It was built years ago, after watching her mother leave when she was 16. That kind of fracture teaches you where your boundaries are, and she knew exactly where hers stood now. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice steady. Ryan looked at her and something softened, but only for a moment. "You deserve to hear this," he said. He didn't look away this time as he spoke. He told her everything, not defensively, not carefully, just truth. Piece by piece. Emily didn't interrupt. She listened. That's who she is. When he finished, she turned to Thomas and Linda. "You came here to use him?" she asked. Her tone didn't rise, but it cut clean. Linda tried again, reaching for emotion. "Emily, this is about family." "No," Emily said, stepping closer to the table. "This is about manipulation." Thomas finally spoke, his voice lower now, stripped of performance. "I was trying to correct something that was done to us." Emily held his gaze without hesitation. "By doing the exact same thing to someone else?" There was no answer to that. Ryan exhaled slowly, then turned back to me. For the first time since we'd met, there was no calculation in his expression, no positioning, just clarity. "I'm sorry," he said, simple, direct. "I should have seen something was off. I didn't ask enough questions." I studied him for a moment, not judging, measuring, not his mistake, but his response to it. "You're asking them now," I said. That mattered more. He nodded once. Then he made his decision, not announced, not dramatized. He simply shifted his chair slightly, subtle but deliberate, creating distance between himself and his parents. It wasn't rejection in words, it was alignment in action. Thomas saw it. You could see the realization settle in, the understanding that whatever plan he had walked in with, it had ended here. "I won't be part of this," Ryan said quietly. "Not like this." And just like that, the choice was made. No one rushed to leave, not immediately. Moments like that don't end with noise. They end with quiet decisions that echo longer than arguments ever could. Thomas was the first to move, but not in the way he had when he arrived. The confidence was gone. His shoulders were still broad, his frame still imposing, but something inside him had shifted, like a structure that looked intact from the outside but had lost its foundation. He stood slowly, adjusting his jacket out of habit more than necessity. Linda followed, her composure still present but thinner now, her eyes avoiding Emily's. She had built her strength around control, around guiding conversations, shaping outcomes, but there was nothing left to shape here. "We should go," Thomas said. Not to me, not even to Ryan, just to the room. Ryan didn't respond. He didn't need to. The distance between them had already been drawn. They walked out without another word. No slammed doors, no final statements, just absence. I watched them leave, then shifted my attention back to Ryan. He hadn't moved much, but the man sitting across from me now wasn't the same one who had invited me to dinner. Not weaker, not broken, just clearer. There's a difference. Emily stepped closer to him, not touching him yet, but close enough that the space between them felt intentional. She had always been strong, but this was a different kind of strength, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself. "You okay?" she asked quietly. Ryan nodded once, exhaling slowly. "Yeah," he said. Then he looked at me again, not as a son-in-law, not as an employee, just as a man trying to understand where he stood. I let the silence sit for a moment before speaking. "You made the right call," I said. No build-up, no lecture, just truth. Ryan held my gaze. "I should have made it sooner," he replied. That mattered more than he probably realized. People don't earn trust by being perfect. They earn it by correcting themselves when it counts. I leaned back slightly, studying him, not the version I had tested, but the one that had just chosen. "Monday," I said. "You're still COO." He blinked, just once, not in disbelief, but in recalibration. "You're sure?" he asked. "I don't make decisions I'm not sure about," I replied. "You proved what I needed to see tonight. Not in how you ran the company, but in how you handled this." That was the difference. Skill builds success. Character sustains it. Emily smiled then, small, relieved, but real. The tension that had been sitting in her shoulders all night finally eased. She reached for Ryan's hand, and this time he didn't hesitate. There was no performance in it, just alignment. I noticed it, but I didn't comment. Some things don't need to be said out loud. Over the next few weeks, things didn't go back to normal. They moved forward. That's different. Ryan and I met properly for the first time, not as roles, not through distance. Just two men at a table, no filters, no assumptions. We talked through everything, the company, the decisions, the gaps. No more blind spots. And for the first time since I built Carter Dynamics, I wasn't the only one carrying the full weight of it. That changed more than I expected. Emily expanded her foundation during that time. What started as a small educational program grew into something structured. Partnerships, funding, reach beyond Austin. Ryan helped where he could, not by taking over but by strengthening what she had already built. That mattered to her. It mattered to me too. Because building something together, without control, without hidden agendas, that's rare. One evening, a few months later, the three of us sat at my kitchen table. Same place, same quiet house. Nothing about it looked different, but everything about it was. No secrets, no tests, just clarity. And for the first time in a long time, I realized something simple. I didn't need to stay invisible anymore. Not completely. So tell me, if you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you trust a man who unknowingly became part of a plan against you? Or walk away before he could hurt you for real? Would you forgive a family that tried to manipulate you, or make them pay for what they almost destroyed? And if you were Ryan, would you stand by your family out of loyalty, or choose the truth, even if it means losing them? Because sometimes the hardest choices aren't about right or wrong. They're about who you choose to become. Drop your answer in the comments. I really want to know where you stand. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful, emotional stories like this. Because some stories don't just entertain, they stay with you.